This is For Advisors by Advisors. I'm your host, Evan J. Mayer, and today we have a very special guest, Miss Karli Vasquez-Mendez.
Hi.
Let's hear your radio voice saying your name.
Hi, I'm Karli. Nice to meet everybody out there in the virtual world.
The radio voice. So she is the Senior Relationship Manager for First Republic Bank. Karli has been in the financial services space since 2007. The last 5 years on the banking side, however, her first 10 years as a financial advisor. So she has a lot of experience in our business. And the story how I met Karli, I joined Raymond James and I came from the bank channel. And in the bank channel, you are secondary, or you're supposed to be secondary to your clients. The bank is supposed to be primary, and the way they introduce you and the way they present you. And at the end of the day, you're the bank's client. And when I joined here, I remember Karli called me and she's like, "Hey, I'm your bank consultant." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm done with that." And she's like, No, you don't understand. It's different here. And the way it was here was, if you want us, we're here and we're going to be as involved as much as you want. And you are definitely that person for me. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So it was an extra leg because we were able to offer banking services to clients, but not push banking services onto clients where there was no compensation on your end to per se drag deposits or that kind of thing. So Karli, give us a little backstory on you. I think you started at Merrill.
I did start at Merrill.
So yeah, give us a little history on your first 10 years in the business and then the last 5 in the banking side.
God, I feel old. I'm going to say
I'm older.
I started out of middle school. Actually, that's actually where it began. I began in high school at 15. I started as a teller. I wasn't even old enough to be bonded yet. And I remember I had to help my family support itself. And so that was actually my first foray to money. You know, I'd never just counting dollar bills. And I remember in college, I'm actually a musician by trade. My father was like, you can be a broke musician or you can do something else that you're kind of good at. And I was like, I've only ever done money. So I went to college, did both finance and music, and started at Merrill Lynch, possibly the very worst time to start in any financial career.
You did the training program there?
I did not. No, I came as a sales assistant, completely unregistered, but I had grown through the credit union and I went from teller to being a branch manager. And so I had some idea of what financial services was, right? Just a basic open an account, people deposit money. I knew how money worked. And so I came into this world, but it was completely new, right? I'll never forget, there was this more seasoned financial advisor at that time. I'll never forget, he wanted me to quote stock prices in fractions. And I was like, I'm sorry, nowadays we use decimals. But it was one of those, you just got to fake it until you make it. And I got registered right away. I think I was the fastest person who got registered. It was like under the 90 days. I was still in my trial period and got registered and boom, the financial crisis hits. And I remember, of course, I'm supposed to be last one in, first one out, right? But I was, where they had me at Merrill Lynch was a branch in Weston, and I was the only Spanish speaker in that branch during a time when nobody could communicate and tell people, hey, your money's gone. Oh, by the way, Bank of America is buying us out, and the whole world is about to change.
And were you in that assistant role the entire time you were there?
No, from there, I was only in assistant role there for about 3 years and then became an FA, but that was then 2010, we left to, because I actually started in 2006, 2010, my team and I, we transitioned over to Citibank.
Got it.
To Citi Private Bank.
And you were at Citi for about 3 or 4 years, right?
4 years. Yeah, I seem to have a 4-year track record. If you look at my resume, it's 4, 4, 4, 4.
But the 4 years at Citi, you were already in the advisor role?
Yeah, I was in the advisor role. So I went over there as what they call an associate private banker, which is like basically a junior FA.
And how many people on the team went?
We were 5 total that went.
Okay.
5 total? We were 4 total, excuse me. 4 total. It was me, myself, it was 4 people total that transitioned over. And then we had another person join afterwards. We were 5 total by the time we did that. And it was interesting at that time, the private bank, obviously the whole world had gone through a transition, right? Smith Barney had just been sold off to Morgan Stanley. And they wanted to be a true private bank where it was a one-stop shop, and the team at that time, it was kind of broken up. If you wanted to do trading, you went to Smith Barney. If you wanted to do banking, you went to your banker, right? It was all very broken up, and a lot of it was based out of New York. A lot of clients were here in Florida. And so they opened an office for us in Boca. We were like a satellite. We were a one-stop shop. So we kind of divided the duties amongst ourselves. One of my partners at the time was like the banker, the true lender. So he did the mortgages, commercial real estate, all that stuff. The other one was a portfolio manager. I ended up taking on like the trader role. So I worked with the desks in New York and was doing fixed income, was doing currency crosses, was doing all the fun. It was actually really fun. It was beyond stressful, but it was a lot of fun. Cut my teeth super sharp.
Then you went to Morgan Stanley.
And then I left to Morgan Stanley.
Now, did everybody come with you to Morgan? So that was just you on your own?
I was the first one out. I first left on my own, kind of set the path, and then my partners did transit. So then the entire team did end up coming over afterwards, about a year. We kind of broke it up that way. And then we were there together for 4 years, and say it's still here in Boca. And at that time, unfortunately, as with some things go, the partnership just terminated. And I decided that at that moment, it was just easier for me to kind of almost like start over. There was a lot of things involved with that, but
how big was the book between everybody at that point?
About $2 billion.
Two how much?
Billion.
$2 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so a couple of the guys were senior.
Yeah. And we dealt mostly with international clients. I would say we were like a 50-50 split, 50 international, 50 domestic. But yeah, we were a $7 million, $2 billion team.
And then you come to Raymond James on the banking end. So basically you were looking for more of a...
I actually wasn't looking. I basically considered myself retired.
Okay.
As far as I was concerned, I was dating a guy at the time that was in the restaurant business. And I was like, I'm just going to go be a host for a second. I don't even know. I'll go work at the line. I don't even know. I'll fry some eggs, figure something out. And I sat down with coffee with my old branch manager who has been at Raymond James. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, with your background, having worked both at the bank, both on the trading side, and having been a financial advisor, you belong at Raymond James. And they're looking for somebody that has international experience. Because at the time they were trying to create an international lending program. It was a document on a paper. It was one sheeter. And they're like, we need somebody who speaks Spanish. And you, having been in the advisor role, you get what it's like sitting on this side. And you also understand the banking side. So you're kind of like the perfect fit for this. And I was like, all right, here I go. And honestly, it was a great time. It was 4 years. I started off covering just South Florida, Palm Beach. So the way it worked at Raymond James, as you know, it was the advisors, right? Any banking deals, you needed an actual person, a liaison to the bank. So it was my job. I came in, we talked about it. What are you looking to do? It'll never pass mustard. Or yeah, let's move forward. And then from there, I went on to like my actual people that make the sausage, if you will. And so I had all of South Florida, Palm Beach down south. And then eventually during the pandemic, they gave me the north as well. And then all the international folks. And
you've been in this role now with First Republic for what, about 6 months?
I'm about to get to my 90 days. Almost.
90 days. Okay.
Almost 90 days.
So it's only been 90 days.
Literally.
And was the thought when you joined First Republic, like, it was great, but I want to get back to kind of being the relationship?
Yeah. It was great. I loved Raymond James. Truthfully, it was I love people, as you know. I mean, I'm still here with you, right? Just great friends, great relationships, amazing place. But at the end of the day, I missed getting my own deals, right? I've always kind of been my own entrepreneur. And so I missed that entrepreneurship, that kind of doing my own destiny. And so, I had this opportunity come up to start. They're brand new in the space here in South Florida. I had a couple offices in Palm Beach, but down here, like, to me, south of Boca, right?
Yeah.
South Florida. This is their first foray into it. And it's been I think for me in this role, it's the first time that I've been able to bring together all of my experiences, and now be able to talk banking, talk wealth management, talk, even trading, and use kind of all the tools in my toolbox, as opposed to just being pegged into one thing as well.
Yeah.
And also, I don't feel in this role now I have to be like the jack of all trades. Like, I've got a great team that supports me, that helps.
You could be the relationship.
Correct.
Yeah.
I can be the relationship, but I'm smart enough at this point to know when things are going wrong. I'm like, because that's half the battle, is just knowing when things are not being followed up with, right? I started off as a sales assistant. I know how the sausage is made and what's being made wrong, or something's stuck in the machine. It's like, dude, that's not how it goes.
Yeah. And I think what's also good is I always find that when bankers go into the roles that you're going into, where they're a personal banker and then they step into this kind of role, they still believe that they are the end all be all of it. And you coming from the advisor role, you can kind of understand the relationship that you're going to have to deal with the money managers that are part of the team and so on and so forth, which is a huge advantage.
Yeah.
The bank space has changed a lot. I actually left the bank channel. You're back in the bank channel to some extent. What are some of the things that us as financial advisors, we might understand lending, but what are some of the behind the scenes things that we don't see?
Oh my God, so many things. So it's interesting, right? I'm coming back into it kind of in another crisis, if you will. It's not a financial crisis like we had, but it's still a very interesting time, right? We're coming out of a pandemic when money was, like at Raymond James, right? People couldn't stop refinancing. People couldn't stop. It was cheap money, if you will, to a certain extent. Now being back on the other side again, when things are tough, right? It's funny, like CDs are back in fashion. And I happened to be in that time when I sold 1 million CDs back in 2009, 2010. And it's interesting, some of my my colleagues now, they're like, why are we selling CDs? I'm like, oh, these things are amazing. You have no idea. I built a whole thing off CDs back in the day. And so it's interesting, again, having had that experience now for, dare I say, well, almost 2 decades.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I've been in this business 20 years and early in my career, bonds were there, but they weren't attractive. And now, like, I'm going on to Bond Trader and I'm buying,
Picking them all up.
6-month bonds at 4.5%. Why not?
Yes, you are. I remember those days too. And it was, you had your ladders. And I remember I would fight with people on Bloomberg. Like, I want that CD, or I want this one. You had to be over the limits and things like that. So it's kind of interesting going back in time almost, if you will. But I think where I, just having sat on both sides of the house now, I think where a lot of, and it goes both ways, right? So bankers don't really tend to think about wealth management, and wealth management doesn't really seem to think about banking. And it's interesting because it was in the journal yesterday, there was monetary policy and fiscal policy, right? People tend to think of those two things, and now they're kind of converging in these new kind of papers that are coming out. And to me, you've got to work both sides, right? Because to me, or else you're missing the whole picture, right? There's a way to I was just talking about a person just about this earlier. There's a big difference between debt and leverage. A lot of old school people, in my opinion, out there, they're like, I pay for everything in cash. Well, that's fantastic. But then, if you lose that opportunity to be able to, even just like the I bonds the other day, who would have thought that would have come back in fashion, in vogue? And here they are, people that crashed the site the other day for 9% I bonds for a little.
Did the site go down? I didn't even see that.
I think it like crashed for 5 minutes or something like that. But people want their $10,000 in these little I bonds.
Well, it's funny. I wrote an article about the I bonds, I want to say a year ago, and they were paying like 6.72%. And I remember, like, I went on the website, I'm like, this is a kind of a clanky kind of website. And then I finally, like, in July, once they've got up to like 9, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do it.
Here's 10 grand.
And I wrote an article to clients about a year ago about doing it. And many of them at the time didn't really read into it. And then the last 90 days, they keep coming up going, what do you think about I bonds? And I'm like, did you read my article? And they're like, no. And then I'm like, well, you probably should have. Kind of talking to them through that. So look, education is power. And even if you do it on the banking end or you do it on this end, I think at the end of the day, clients should be aware of all their options.
Because they work holistically. They work hand in hand. There's always, in bad markets or good markets, I always say there's a way to make money somehow. There's a way to leverage things. There's a way, using the bank or whichever balance sheet you want to use, there's a way to do it, to be able to leverage your assets and make more money somehow. And I think that's the key that gets forgotten sometimes, right? We're so focused on building portfolios or on models that we forget that there's other ways over here. And then same thing, right? The bank always forgets there's other ways over there. So if you work both sides,
I think incentive wise, that can mess up people
and that's
too.
True. Like, absolutely.
I remember at my previous firm, there would be situations where if the banker had not hit their deposit goals, they would be they wouldn't go investments bad, but they would go deposits really good.
Yeah, of course.
And then if they already hit their deposit goals, well, you should really consider investing your money. And the conflict of interest was always, in my opinion, it wasn't a profit sharing situation. It wasn't a revenue situation. It was fill these buckets and you have to have all these buckets filled to get compensated. This is a new bank down here. Is every bank the same in that compensation structure? Do you see it a little bit different?
I do see it differently, even like from wealth management firm to wealth management firm, right? So like some firms, again, you have to hit these bogeys and then you get like a back pay incentive once you hit that bogey, right? A lot of them force you to maybe do things that are not that they're not right for the client, but cross-selling becomes a little much, right? And then you have the competing silos within each other, right? So you have the more electronic version or you have the more, so then it's because like, well, which one do I focus on? But this one's a little bit different. I think this particular where I'm at now, it's a little more collaborative. It kind of forces you to work with everybody as a team because everybody, like all ships rising with the tides, whatever that saying is. And
you joined after COVID.
I joined over COVID.
So people are not walking in like they once were. So it's a little interesting. Do you have one location or do you cover many or do you cover like more of a territory now?
I'm a Florida resident through and through, but I will always claim that to my death. But I also do have a little 500 square foot apartment in Astoria. So I spend time in New York as well. I actually leave Saturday back up there. So I split my time very wisely between both. So I'm officially based out of Boca, but I do actually work out of New York as well.
So you can actually work out of both spots, which is great. And are they in both locations? They're in New York also?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yes. Yeah, they're in New York. And it's interesting, right? Because it's interesting to see the perspectives of two different markets, right? Because you hear on the news and you don't always get what's happening out west, what's happening central, what's happening on the East Coast. And it's very, very different, right? So I think Florida is unique in that people are still coming here, quite frankly. People are still, it's interesting, right? Right now I'm doing a condo in a particular building up there that's still pre-construction. and it's like only it's less than 25% sold, right? In a very, very popular area of New York versus Miami, it's like 86% sold and it's barely broken
Everything's
ground,
gone, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's very, very different dynamic. It's different clients, of course, right? We still in Miami, you get the international folks coming in still, and you still get a lot of development in particular neighborhoods around here. It's just interesting to be able to see the different types of markets and how what's happening in the overall economy affects them differently as well.
It's so funny because I'm here in Boca and you go 1 hour south and there's all this international stuff. And it's funny, we don't understand the international markets the way we should in the concept of offshore investments and things and what has to go into that. And there's a lot.
There is. And by the way, they don't necessarily understand how we work either, right? So I used to get these balance sheets and it's completely illiquid. And they're like, but I've got $100 million. And I'm like, if I had to sell your stuff tomorrow, it would take me a year. That's not liquid. Yeah. So it's very, very different. And by the time you get all these layers and through, so it goes both ways. It's an education from both sides of how the US works and how they work as well, and the reason why they do things the way they do them. So
let's hop into politics. Now, I'm not talking about Republican Democrat politics. I'm talking about politics in banking and in investments. So where I came from, it was ultra political. There was a lot of, you got to scratch this person's back, you got to do that. Now being independent, I don't really have to do that. And my affiliation, they're there to help you. So I guess my question for you is, you were at Merrill, Citi, Morgan, then here, and now a full-on bank. Have you seen, what are the different political dynamics that you've run into? I believe there's no politics here. You could tell me if I'm wrong. Maybe there is on the banking side, but what politics have you run into?
Oh, that's a very
loaded question.
That's a very loaded question. Yeah, so I think some firms are more political than others. I will definitely say there is, especially, I'm just going to come out and say, as a female, and do I have to say that I identify as that? I don't even know if that's a thing.
You can just say you're a female.
I'm a female.
I'm cool with it.
And it's interesting. So, for example, the other day I was at an event and somebody asked me if that was my boss, and it was actually a person junior to me. And I'm like, no, actually, I don't get coffee anymore for people, that kind of thing. So I hate to say it, but unfortunately, as much strides as we made, I don't want to make this a female kind of thing. I'm not trying to say that, but I mean, there's still definitely some very big stereotypes, I would say.
Let's hop in there.
Yeah.
Let's hop in there, because as a white male, though some would consider me Jewish, so then I'm technically not a white, I don't know. But I guess I'm still considered a white male in finance. We don't see those stereotypes the same way, but when I speak to women advisors, I do see that they see it, and they see it still strongly. Now, I can understand, because when you look in a room, like I was in a room last week in Austin where there was probably 70 people, and yeah, men made up maybe 50, but that was still 20 women compared out of 70 was a big number historically.
Right.
So the strides have been made, but you still feel it.
Oh, you still feel it. And it's interesting that you say that, right? So the strides have been made, but there's still a long way to go, right? So prime example, like right now, I'm the only female banker in the Boca area for my particular company. I feel it. Maybe because I'm numb to it now, which is maybe not necessarily a good thing. And again, I try not to play the gender card at all. To me, I believe in a meritocracy. I believe you're going to shine by your merits, whether you're either good or you're not.
Yep.
And I think that's the same thing with advisors, right? You're going to be a good advisor, a bad advisor, a good banker. You're going to follow up. You're going to talk to talk. You're going to be educated and well-read. I still see it all the time, right? So it's interesting. Like one of the first things I got when I got to my new job was I had a budget for football tickets. I love football. If you know me, my dog's name is Eli, just by the way, shout out. So I love
another one named Daniel soon or what?
I love sports, but some of my clients, I don't necessarily have a big clientele that likes sports. I have a lot of female people, and they prefer other sorts of activities. And I was like, so can I allocate this for concerts or something else like that? But it's interesting, right? Because you automatically assume the golf, the football, and things like that. But there's a whole population. You get a golf day. Let me have a spa day, right? So let me cater to the clientele that I have and what the activities they like, because it's different.
It is, yeah.
So it's like even little things like that you don't necessarily notice, but in my world, like for me, I do notice it, because I'm just like, it'd be very difficult for me to sell a box out probably for football. Most guys want to hang out with their guys.
I would say in the bank channel, there is a lot of females compared to men. I wouldn't say it's over, but specifically in the branch levels.
So that is fair, right? So
but you don't see it
in senior.
You don't see it on the investment financial side as much.
Well, even at the bank. So think about it. When I was at Raymond James, there was 10 of us as banking consultants across the country.
Yep.
There's 2 females.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
So I would say physically, when you walk into branches, that is true. There's lots of females, but for better or worse, they tend to be more in the junior roles. They tend to be assistants.
Yeah.
Right? They still tend to be more in the service side of it versus the actual sales side of it, more in the senior sales side of it. And I think that falls a lot on us to be able to educate them and tell them. I think a lot of them are, I don't want to say fear is the word, but they're maybe not encouraged, right? To get, so like me, I could have gotten stuck in a sales assistant role, had on that push, and I pushed hard to break out of that mold, to break that invisible glass ceiling everybody talks about, but it really does exist. And you have to have a certain attitude. There's a certain finances. It can be very tough, especially it's a very competitive environment. It's extremely competitive. And I think some people are just discouraged sometimes from shining forth and saying, no, I can actually do this. It's okay. I can ask people for money.
Now, when you were at the wirehouses, I'm guessing it was even more, though. And it was the old boys network kind of situation.
Yeah.
Did you feel that way when you were at those firms?
Yeah, I did. And just in Wall Street in general, I still walk into a room, people still assume that I'm the assistant, even to this day. I'm like, no, not quite.
Yeah.
Which is fine. We all I can't live without the team and the assistants that I have. I think there's nothing like having a great support system. But I think there's something to be said as well for having been seasoned and cut your teeth.
As a seasoned vet, female, what advice would you give to female advisors or bankers that are getting involved now? And what mistakes or things that you did not do that you wish you would have done when you were younger?
The one thing I will say that there's two things that I did. One, I over apologize, and I still work on that on a daily basis. I've noticed that most guys, they never apologize, right? I'm always saying I'm sorry. And I'm like, why am I sorry? I'm not sorry about anything. Like, I don't need to apologize for. So I think that's one thing that I tend to be personally that I'm still always working on is the over apologizing. And then two, most guys, they're just not fear. Like I've been on calls before and I'm like, man, he just went for it. Even I surprised myself. And I think sometimes we want to be so almost, and I don't want to say subservient, but it's like, we forget to just ask, to say, hey, write me a check for 100 grand. Let me prove to you what I have. And I think that can be a real challenge. And I struggle with even myself, even after all these years. So.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can get to that level too where you don't even need to ask.
Fair. And that's true. Yeah.
But you're right. In the beginning, you have to ask.
You have to ask. You just have to ask. You have to close the deal.
Yeah.
Or else you will have just wasted an hour.
I do think, though, and again, I was at this conference and we're seeing these inclusion networks popping up, and they're popping up. In some ways, they're popping up and adding many different groups. I actually had a conversation with somebody who there's the Latino group now that is coming in, and then the LGBTQ, and then there's the female group, and you can keep naming these groups and keep adding on. Do you think that takes away from what women are trying to accomplish in the business by adding too many groups into those inclusion networks?
I don't necessarily think it takes away. That's a great question. I'm trying to think of it now. Personally, unfortunately, for better or worse, I don't actually participate in most of the groups. To be fair, I have found personally, as opposed to like those workplace groups, I have found like the networking groups that I have outside have actually been much more powerful for me personally.
Okay.
So I've done like a lot of work with the junior league, for example. I've done, I'm starting to get now out of pandemic. I'm starting to get involved with some of the other ones. I find those personally to be much more impactful than like the ones in my job. But that's just the way it is. Because I find that stuff to be so corporate. That's just
it can be. It can.
I don't know. I've never really found much. It doesn't really change my life. Like it doesn't.
Yeah, unless it's doing something ultra beneficial,
Right.
like financing things that you want to accomplish to empower you to give you an extra step up.
Yeah.
Which again, anybody can get anything. I say, welcome to capitalism. Go for it.
Exactly.
So
I can't, to be honest, I'm neutral on that because I never benefited or not benefited from it. I have found that my outside groups of females and entrepreneurs, and because that's one thing I will say, it's like being part of the groups, like I will say when females join together, it's a very powerful force. We're really good about referring other people to other people and being like, introduce person to this person. And I think once females are comfortable with each other in that group setting, it's a great chain link to have. And I will say I've built some beautiful networks and friendships because of it.
That's great. Hopping back on the politics side, though, non-female, male, more on the backstabbing that can happen and things along those lines, and banking and he said, she said, or they said nowadays. Have you been experiencing any of that? Because you weren't in that culture before per se, at least you were more segregated into these groups.
I will definitely say back in the day, I definitely experienced that a lot. Yeah, there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of who do you know? This person's here because of this person. There's a lot of backstabbing, a lot of FaceTime. I remember when I was at one firm, I would literally just go from floor to floor, just shaking hands and kissing babies just to be able to get something done. Even if I wanted allocation or something like that, I knew I had to play the game. It was FaceTime.
Especially with the compliance people.
Yeah, you want to get in there. And to be fair, like even nowadays, I make it a point to go and talk to the internal people and just make friends with them. And you want to get them on your good side. And I don't think that's necessarily just in banking. I think that's just in general, right? Who do you like? You got a doctor's appointment, for God's sake. It's who do you know to get me ahead of that person in line? And I hate to say it that way, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's just, it is the way that it is, or else you'll be at the back of the line waiting for 2 months for an appointment. And I think that's just true in general. It just, unfortunately, it is what it is. It's who you know. How do you get them to say yes?
Well, it's like in anything. First time I got COVID, I only got it once, I think. I think it was like 6 months ago, and they had that Paxlovid drug out that like supposedly made you feel better in like a day, and it was selling out everywhere. And I called my doctor and I'm like, you got to get me the Paxlovid. I was like, I don't care where you go, where you send me, I got to get it. And getting in the front of the line is an important thing. So
yeah.
In your career, even sometimes more, well, maybe not as important as your health.
No, it is.
This is important. What would be some advice you would give to advisors that have been at different firms? Like what you've been in multiple channels now too. What would have been the right channel for Karli? And what do you think the right channel is for certain advisors?
You know, it's interesting. So being like, having said, Raymond James gave me a unique perspective into the independent and the like W-2 channel, like employee channel, if you will. And it's interesting. I think a lot of advisors dream of being independent, like having what you have here. But I think a lot of folks don't realize you have to be an entrepreneur first, right? You have to be able to take on your own compliance, your own this, your own that, so that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And I think it goes both ways. I think a lot of independents would be bad for the employee channel because they need that independent structure. They just need a platform to be able to do it on. And I think that was very unique perspective for me to see from both sides. Some people were just, they raved about being independent. I'm like, I don't actually think you'd cut it. You need somebody to oversee you, and you need that kind of structure that the employee channel provides for you.
Did you see a difference in the advisors on the employee side to the non? You did.
Yeah, totally. Big difference. Big difference.
And what was like the biggest personality trait difference?
Like I said, I think for on the independent side, you have to be an entrepreneur first. You have to be a business owner. You have to know how to run a business, just to be able to lease your space and negotiate that, right? The little details. You have to be your own business first, and the advisory fills into that. On the other side, if you only want to be only an advisor and not deal with anything else, you rely on the employee channel, period.
Yeah.
Because people see the big number, right? A 90% payout, 80% payout, but then they don't realize there's taxes, there's this, there's that. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes into being your own independent human.
There's rent.
There's rent.
Yeah.
You got to pay your rent. And a lot of people are bad about paying it personally, much less
about 80 grand a year for this place. So
I'm like, they look at that payout and I'm like, well, and it's also numbers, right? You can't just be starting out and then expect to also be an entrepreneur, right? Some people would see that. I'm like, you're not going to get 90% on the day one like that.
Well, not only that, but let's be honest. It doesn't matter how much you produce. You're not going to generate 80 or 90 take home. Your real take home on the independent side, I would say, for somebody like myself that wants to spend a lot of money, could be 55%. On the high end, maybe 70, 75 if you're like working from home. But if you have an office, you have employees, multiple employees, you have a lot of costs that go in and eat up whatever your actual net payout is. So
that's exactly right.
But I think the concept of being independent would be more the concept of doing and saying what you want to do than what you're spending. Yeah. And the entrepreneurial thing, I do hear people say that, and people say it that are currently running RIAs and independent firms, that you have to be an entrepreneur first. And I think you do, to the concept of the first steps. But once it's like when you're running,
your stride is fine.
You hit your stride, you're going, you go, I probably spend an hour a week on the actual business and the rest of the time with the clients. So it can get easier or hard. Karli, we went over a lot today, a lot of interesting things that I wasn't even sure we were going to go over today. But that's the cool part about not coming in with the script or an idea, is just talking. You're driving home from today's podcast and you're listening to another podcast and you're like, I wish I would have brought up a point or two about this. What's a really good piece of advice, a value add to advisors, maybe to advisors that were thinking of joining the bank channel, and the concept that maybe they don't want to be a financial advisor anymore. They're interested potentially in the bank. That could even be something.
What's the word? What's my biggest piece of advice? What is? at least for me personally, going back to your earlier question, like the biggest thing that I learned was I didn't like being a financial advisor, quite frankly. I think sometimes people are afraid to just say that, right? Once you get into it, it's like you almost have to
First
prove
time I've ever
something.
heard you say it.
Yeah, I actually didn't like it, only because I found myself that I like transacting. That was my thing. I think that's why being on the bank side for me personally was cool, because I closed the deal and I went to the next one. So for people that like the financial planning, that like that just follow up, that where the industry has gone, I guess I should say, and the more managed and kind of that style, I think that's amazing. But don't be afraid to say, hey, I really don't like where this industry went, and so I'm going to pivot. I think that's the worst mistake people can make. And I think that's maybe sometimes that separates good advisors from bad advisors. So
It's a really good piece of advice, actually, because I've never heard anybody say that. I've heard it's not right for me now, or it's not the right position for me. Could you ever see yourself joining a team where you were transacting to bring the clients into the team, but after that you were done with it?
Totally. Yeah.
That would be more your cup of tea.
That's more my cup. And I think I think I finally start to find that, because that's what I like to do. I like to build relationships. But then if your Google stock went down $5 today, I'm not the girl to call.
Yeah, you don't got to worry about it.
I don't have to worry about the models or reallocating and all of that stuff. It just for me personally, it drives me bonkers. And I think that had I stayed and forced myself to like it, I would be miserable today. So I think for some people, it's okay to say this is not the greatest fit for me, and then to pivot, find something else. And same thing for the banking world, right? You came out of it. You're like, I hated doing that. And so you pivot. But I think the worst thing you can do is just stay in a position for 20 years just for the sake of doing it forever.
Correct. I couldn't agree more. And you put it right. So I love that. Karli, if anybody wants to get a hold of you, she does do banking in Florida and New York. And if she's in a different state, you could still call her because she's an expert. Karli, how can anybody get a hold of you?
Call my cell. It's all literally with my business card and everything. So just call my cell. Don't call me on Instagram.
Or find her on LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn? Or
find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is perfect.
There you go.
Message me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to respond and keep talking.
Awesome. Thanks for coming in.
Appreciate it.
For everybody that's listening, feel free to reach out to me too. I could also get you in touch with Karli, and I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and we look forward to the next one. Thanks.